Hi guys, welcome back to the Social Tune. And today, you all knew it was coming, right? I'm gonna be reviewing the new album by Marianas Trench, Haven. So I haven't done an album review in a very long time. In fact, if you go back through the history of this channel, you'll see that the last album review I did was back in 2019 for this band's last album, Phantoms. And considering I don't really do album reviews anymore, one or two of you might be wondering why I'm making an exception for these guys. Well, if you've subscribed to this channel more recently, you might not be aware of this, but these guys are my all-time favorite band. To the point where, when A Normal Life dropped, the first song from this album, I had multiple people in my DMs telling me about its existence the moment it came out. And to those wonderful people, thank you so much. I was ecstatic to be getting new music from these guys after 5 whole years. Which is ironic because I'm pretty sure that Josh Ramsey promised us all he would never make us wait that long ever again. That being said, there were some good reasons for that wait this time around. For one, the pandemic threw everybody off, including every single one of you watching this. But I think the bigger indication that things were changing was the Josh Ramsey Show, a solo project that Josh dropped back in 2022 and was a huge departure both thematically and sonically from everything we'd come to know and love about the band over the past 15 years. And while even as a hardcore Marianas Trench fan, even I had to admit that not every single collaboration worked outside of some real gems, the point was clear. The band was changing, and not just sonically. They're all married or settled down, most of them have kids. And you could make the argument that the musical journey that was started on 2009's Masterpiece Theater had reached its conclusion by Phantoms. I have reviews for all of those albums if you're curious, but to cut a very long story short, what more is there to tell of a story when you've documented the love, the breakup, and even the recovery thereafter over the course of 4 projects? And I will be completely honest, on my first, second, and even my 5th listen, I wasn't entirely sure if this was working for me as a whole. Don't get me wrong, I had a similar reaction to Phantoms when it first dropped. When your best works include multiple 10 out of 10 masterpieces, including my favorite album of all time, those are almost impossible shoes to fill. But as a huge fan, I was willing to put in the time to figure it all out, and I am so glad I did. Because now, I can't even put Haven down. I legitimately haven't listened to a single other project over the past week. Because after this album clicked, it really stuck with me. A terrific concept album with very broad writing at first glance, until you start to notice all the little details, and then you can't unsee them. And yeah, it should go without saying that for me, this is one of the best albums of the year so far, and one of my personal favorite releases. Now again, it did take some time to get there. And while part of that was just me being dumb and not being able to connect all the dots at first, much like their last album, the rock-solid themes can still have 1 or 2 compositional weak points, with a couple of tracks that are great in concept, but fall ever so slightly short as individual songs. Lightning and Thunder has grown on me a ton, but the slower chorus can still feel a bit lumbering and clumsy to me, even with how clean it sounds. The instrumental on Down to Use Verses feels so bare bones for such a pivotal moment on the album, and Nights Like These is a decent kumbaya feel-good type of song that just feels a little bit perfunctory. I understand why it's here, but it's probably the weakest song on the album. But those are minor nitpicks on songs that I still don't ever skip, because the musical journey on this project is just gorgeous, and easily the first thing that jumped out to me about this album. Where Phantoms dabbled in creepy, classic horror movie scores in terms of influence, even Echoes of You and The Killing Kind couldn't recreate the opening moments on this album, on the opening track A Normal Life. With the heavy bass horns and the pattering rain, and the plucking tense strings that kicks off this album on a really epic note. Like a film score that just builds and builds until Josh Ramsey's voice just bursts forth. leading us into one of Marianas Trench's trademark orchestral openers that goes through multiple sonic shifts and lasts nearly 7 minutes. This band has always had fantastic opening tracks, and this is one of my absolute favorites. I first heard A Normal Life in the dead of night after scrambling around for like 10 minutes trying to find a version of it I could listen to, and it just immediately brought me to tears. It's so orchestral and grandiose. The kind of composition that made so many of us fall in love with this band in the first place. No other pop band has this level of vision. And for the record, Josh is just in top form on this album, as he brings songs like Stand and Fight to brand new heights on performance alone. Still one of the best voices working in music today, even when he's this close to 40. Even Down to You, in spite of its production gripes, is so elevated because of the desperation in his voice. Then you have the Hangdog I'm Not Getting Better, that strikes a similar chord to Don't Miss Me from their last album, but fully realized in its ideas, and man is it catchy. Now or Never has that wonderful ticking motif that transitions into these larger-than-life synths, with some of the best backing vocals on this album, especially in the lead up to the bridge. Then you have the cinematic crescendo of Into the Storm, one of my first true loves on this project, with the lush piano and one of Josh's best ever vocal performances, taking the time to build to that massive second hook with the blasting synths, soaring guitars, and the ethereal group vocals. Again, huge shout out to both Matt and Mike for the work there. You need a cool down after that, and the cheeky saxophone on Ancient History just made that song for me. And while again, Stand and Fight could have easily just been another song, Josh just kills the performance, and the string makes me feel like I'm sitting in an opera hall. Then you have the cinematic Inception-esque Turn and Run, where the bells, the frigid piano, and the creepy strings on the bridge, that all builds to that explosion of strings, sounds like sci-fi horror, especially with that haunting outro. Once again, just such a realization of the ideas planted on Phantoms. Then you have Worlds Collide, which I actually thought was the closer the first time I heard it, especially with those trademark callbacks to the rest of the album, a theme that they started on Masterpiece Theater and have thankfully kept up all this time. Oh, and don't think I missed the quotes that were pulled directly from Masterpiece Theater, how could I? With the eerie transition to the more minor synths, and the spaghetti western twang that leads to that 50s Fantasia-esque chorus of strings, and even more sonic nods towards End of an Era for the final track from Astoria. But no, that's all just the setup for the final arc of the album, which I will be honest could be seen as a weak point in the pacing of the project, especially when the next track is Nights Like These, the weakest song here. Thankfully, we pick up very quickly with Remember Me By, arguably the song that has grown on me the most since first listen, calling back to the same disco as 2015's Burning Up, and it's a ton of fun. And then you have the real closer, the 8.5 Titanic title track. And as much as I adore Worlds Collide, holy shit is this awesome. The slow, almost half-whispered build-up with the minimal accompaniment that then transitions into that lower, Western-style bass line as the mix continues to build alongside Josh's voice, before the backing vocals finally come in on the lines We All Fall Together, and that futuristic, pulsing dance beat with the erratic synths splaying across the mix, before Josh and the strings surge to the front of the mix for just a moment, giving us a taste of what's to come, and it peels back again for the symphonic backdrop around Josh's voice, before the strings come back, kicking into high gear with a palpable urgency, as the horns and the drums join in to really build up that atmosphere, before multiple elements and themes from the album, including the ticking motif from Now or Never, all come back with a fervor, and the final medley begins with callbacks to all the songs that came before it, including Worlds Collide, and with one more desperate crescendo, that classic choral line that you should all know and love bursts forth as the voices harmonize in a moment that invokes Masterpiece Theater one final time before then referencing normal life in just the perfect way. Quite simply, their best closing track since Masterpiece Theater 3, and that is a high compliment coming from me. This tempest of mine, she's murder on the ice. So, considering all that praise, why the fuck did it take me this long to really warm to this project? Well, the thing is, I'm a lyrics guy, and until they click, everything kind of hangs in the balance. And I gotta say, I was really struggling to figure out what this album meant to say. Josh Ramsey had mentioned in interviews that this was inspired by the hero's journey, hence why this album sounds so cinematic. But where exactly did it fit into the saga that they had spent 4 albums building up? I mean, if it was connected at all. After all, it would make sense that this could be a brand new era, fully removed from all the drama of those past projects. I just had to be willing to let go of those themes the way that they clearly have, even with how much those albums mean to me. Especially if they're in happier, healthier places in their lives, I should be able to respect that. Well, it turns out that I'm not the only one who's still thinking about those times, which is where the lyrics finally started making sense. Because while this is technically a new chapter in the Marianas Trench saga, a new beginning to their new lives, it doesn't mean that the past just didn't happen. It's why Down to You is such an important clue on this album, as it has Josh calling back to that old flame who made him fall in love and then broke his heart. The reason for the last decade of their careers, not just an ex, but a lost muse. And now that he's settled down in his normal life with his wife and child, where he might be approaching a midlife crisis and still wants to be able to create, what should his new muse even be? Especially when this normal life doesn't quite sit right with him. It's similar to the themes on that last American Aquarium album, where the artist is getting older and more responsible, but the open road still calls. A pull stronger than lightning and thunder. And it's very key to me that Josh mentions his parents on this track, who sadly both passed away in 2020, and with them, 2 of the only voices of reason that he still had in his adult life. Which is where the self-destructive tendencies of I'm not getting better come in, where he shows that a backslide into old bad habits could be very possible. After all, how can you carry on without this muse? It all comes down to you. Or does it? Because while the past is important in the ways that it shapes you, ultimately, you still have to learn from it to focus on the now. His wife, his child, his family, it's all right here, right now, and it's a dream worth fighting for, now or never. But saying that, and actually meaning it beyond the empty words, that's tough. It's not just a switch that you can flip, especially with a decade of context, as those memories just swirl around and engulf him like a storm, one he was always meant to walk into the middle of and then surrender to. Only once he actually confronts those memories head on, he realizes, duh, we're not even in each other's lives anymore. They're ancient history. He moved away a long time ago. And said history still matters, sure, but it doesn't own him. As you can tell, there's a lot of duality and pushing and pulling throughout this album, because the point is that it all matters, it all adds to the context of the story. Perhaps no better illustrator than having Stand and Fight and Turn and Run placed right next to each other in the track list. So maybe instead of moving on, he just needs to find balance. Let those worlds collide and just accept it all together. He can take it on with some help, as he realizes his past can be remembered and doesn't need to be buried like a secret. Which is why nights like these ultimately does feel very sweet, as a tribute to his friends, his family, and his fans. Enjoying the here and now and all the mundane, simple pleasures that life has to offer. Which makes Remember Me by a jaunty, love-struck tune where he's flirting with his new wife. The kind of high-energy love song that Marianas Trench hasn't actually attempted since the early 2010s, perhaps indicating what a future sound from this band could ultimately sound like, as Josh is finally allowing himself to write those love songs for a new person. Because after all that doubt, the hero's journey brought him right back to where he started. What he was really looking for was here all along, his wife and child. And this normal, ordinary life can be made extraordinary alongside them. His safe space, his shelter from the storm, his haven. Guys, I remember when Phantoms dropped, I was going back and forth as to whether I liked it more or a little less than Ever After. And while those 2 albums have been constantly swapping back and forth in my ranking for years now, This new album dropped and just blew right past both of them. The scope is massive. It might just be their most ambitious album in terms of compositional excellence. The amount of full orchestral moments is just staggering, and almost every single idea here works, both the ones paying tribute to the past, as well as the bold new ones looking towards the future. All wrapped up in an arc that feels so incredibly satisfying and human. I've often thought that this band's most unappreciated strength is their songwriting, but they pulled off this concept masterfully. And while I'm hesitant to call this album my favorite of the year so far, time will tell. For now, it's one of the strongest 9 out of 10s that I have dealt out in some time. A gorgeous tour de force of an album that rewards multiple re-listens, as I'm still finding new details every time I play it. Josh, Ian, Matt, and Mike, thank you so much for making something this extraordinary, and I can't wait to see where you go next. And hey, for anyone here who wants more Marianas Trench in their lives, once again, you can find reviews for all of their albums on this channel linked here somewhere, along with a top 10 list of their best songs that still holds up fairly well in my opinion. Thank you for watching this till the end. I know it went long, I had a lot to say. And if you did enjoy this, leave a like, maybe a comment to tell me your own thoughts on this album. And a subscribe wouldn't really go amiss either. If you need more incentive for that, I'm editing a much larger video that should be available towards the end of the month, so stay tuned for that. And until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is The Social Tune, signing off.